Unlabeled leadership is a volunteer service. We appreciate our guests for their stewardship and remarkable stories. We also appreciate listeners like you who back the show with star reviews and contributions.
Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to episode 140, Mike Watson and the Pursuit of a Noble Purpose. Here's a shout out to listeners in Alpharetta, Georgia, Miami Beach, Florida, Ventura, California, Alexander City, Alabama, and Boise, Idaho. With that, let's get started. Mike Watson believes that employee well-being is not only a business imperative, it's a moral obligation. He explains that with a defined plan of action, companies can create both economic and social welfare. He lives in the greater Vancouver area, where he's the president of Ignite Management. Mike specializes in strategic planning, meeting facilitation, executive development, and family enterprise advisory. Mike co-authored Rise Up, Leadership Habits for Turbulent Times, in which he shares his wealth of knowledge and experiences to help you become more effective at leadership. If you're part of a mid-sized company looking for strategic direction, you might want to get in touch with Mike and his team. Part 1. Not Telling How. Jack Zinger, co-founder and CEO of Zinger Folkman, wrote an article where he shared an observation which I call Zinger's Leadership Development Observation. Zinger Folkman has a database of more than 17,000 worldwide managers at all career levels. And here's the observation. The average age of those managers is 42. More than half are between the ages of 36 and 49. And under 30, it's only 10%. When you go to 27, it's less than 5%. Here's the point. It may be that many people entering into management do not receive leadership training. Many people entering into management may not have an interest in leadership. They think, well, maybe they can figure it out on their own and just learn trial by error. Unfortunately, trial by error, it doesn't work too well. In this story, Mike shares an early experience he had as a branch manager. Here's Mike with the story.
I was a young banker, Gary. I had been put into my first branch manager role. I was 27 years old, at a staff of 30 people, and I'd never had a direct report prior to this time. And I had lots of smarts, but I had very little acumen in leading people. And my instincts, regrettably, were quite off the mark. It was all about push, 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 push. My father was an advisor to me, mentor, advisor, dad. We talked regularly, and he wasn't one to tell me what to do. He'd let me make my mistakes in life all the way along. But I know this one day he was getting a bit frustrated. He was listening to me talk about what I needed, and I got to tell them, and why don't they do this? He quietly said to me, he says, Mike, he says, I feel like you're overcomplicating this a little bit. What I found in life is if I share with the people I work with where I want to go, I share with them why I want to go there, and then I ask them for their help, a lot of the problems seem to dissipate. And that really stuck with me. Share where you want to go, share why you want to go there, and then ask for the help. I credit Dad for that one.
It's such a beautiful way of phrasing it, because what's implicit in that is when you share where you want to go, it's not sharing how you want them to help. It's not telling them what to do, but it's enabling them to look at where you want to go, that you want their help, and letting them decide, what can I do to help the branch, to help Mike, my manager, get to that point, arrive at that goal. I think that's well stated and very empowering.
I think you nailed it very much on the it's not telling them how. I actually was too young to really understand what he was saying at the time. It took a few more years and a few more pretty big mistakes to get there, Gary. But when I look back on it, it really was the wisdom of give people the power of choice and how they will do it, and the ability to embrace it themselves and to own it, take it as their own. So it has become quite powerful for me.
It gives purpose, but also room for, and I'm going to use this word deliberately, play with the variables to figure out what they can do creatively to help get there.
Yeah, very much so. It's so intriguing to me, the power of creativity when people are given that permission statement. They know it's theirs to do. It's liberating for people. These are the folks that do the task day to day. They know it better than I should ever know it, or we should ever know it as leaders. By seeking their input and giving them choice, it is really, really powerful.
That's an interesting point. A lot of people that are in positions of authority, just like you said, they don't know the day, especially higher up. And if they're 2 or 3 degrees removed from the actual work, they're not going to know the variables. They're not going to know the nuances with customers. If it's a customer facing employee, there's just a lot that's unknown, and being able to trust employees to be the expert of what's going on and giving them the framework or the guidance or the direction, it makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, you've got my mind jumping into one of our adages, and we refer to it as strategy from within.
Mm.
And what that says is strategy doesn't work if somebody tells you what you should do. It works when you create it yourself. And we're in the middle of an engagement right now that's quite fascinating. It's a fairly large corporate publicly traded enterprise. We're helping the senior executive team build strategy, but as part of it, we're doing a fair bit of outreach, direct calls and focus groups with the operational leaders throughout the organization. And it has been absolutely fascinating to watch them embrace this process, knowing that operational realities will be inputs to the strategy that is coming their way. They're quite receptive to being given the strategy as long as they know that the operational realities are part of it.
I'm going to guess this is the first time that the people on the operations side have been engaged in this sort of way. By doing that, that has had an engaging effect with those operating managers and has an effect on the quality of their output.
I'm smiling to myself because if you could see the faces on these Zoom calls, they're told to be on a call and they get on the call. And then we talk through the methodology with them and explain our approach, which is if strategy is created without operational input, it is being set up to fail. So we need to know your story. We need your guidance and advice as inputs to the strategy. It's amazing, Gary, to watch the change in body language, the receptivity, how the deep thinking begins, because they now know they matter. And their opinions matter, and their expertise matters.
Part 2, rigorous boot camp exercise. As you move up in organizations, leadership becomes more important. Your technical functional abilities that may have gotten you there, they become less important. Once you reach the C-suite level, how you lead affects the overall performance of your organization. One way to strengthen your leadership as you move up to a new career level, especially at the executive level, is have an executive coach who can help you develop your leadership in context of your work. That's why people like Mike Watson are so crucial for the executive level of organizations, especially at the C-suite. In this story, Mike talks about an executive who he's about to coach. Here's Mike.
I'd like to tell a story about a leader that we worked with. And this gentleman was a senior vice president in a labor relations organization. He is brilliant. He has a strategic mind like I don't know that I've ever come across before. And the organization was in transition. There was a CEO who was leaving, and it was the culture that the board of directors was concerned with. There was some evidence of bullying, silos had developed, and it was time to put in a new CEO. Well, it's a labor relations organization, and this senior VP was the grand master of labor relations. In fact, in Canada, considered to be one of the finest in the country.
Wow.
We went through the interview process. He wasn't the successful candidate, and it was a shock to him and to others around. Perhaps to add insult to injury, the board of directors appointed a person into the role who hadn't applied. They appointed the CFO into the role, and it was an interim role. The message they sent to the senior VP is you have all the technical skills, but we're a little concerned about some of your leadership, and we think it needs to mature a little bit. He was devastated, Gary. Like, he was truly devastated. He spent his whole career working towards this place, and his goal was to be the CEO of this enterprise. The board engaged us to work with this leader to help him develop the soft skills. And in his case, it was about working with people, demonstrating care, being open and transparent and vulnerable. His response was, sure, tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. If that's what it takes to get the job, then that's what I'll do. Tell me what I got to do. My gosh, it led to a very, very uncomfortable meeting. I sat with this gentleman and I looked him in the eye and I said, I got to tell you the truth. I said, if you're doing this just to get the job, I don't think I can help you. If there isn't some bigger purpose to why you are doing these changes, then honestly, I think it'll falter. You might get the job, but you will have faked it to get the job. The old behaviors will come back. The board made a decision with a lot of wisdom that went into it. They think the world of you. They also see these gaps. I think maybe we should call a little break from this and let you give it some thought. Well, the meeting didn't go particularly well. It didn't end well. Emotions were elevated, clearly triggered some emotions in him. Faces were red. And to be honest, some unpleasantries were exchanged. But we did finish on a calm basis. And I said, well, look, let's reconvene a week or two from now and you can share your thinking on it. I thought for sure this client was gone. I didn't see much hope for furthering the engagement. It was about 5 days later, and my phone rang, and I saw who it was, and I picked up the phone, and I heard this voice shaking on the other end. He said, I've done nothing but think about this for 5 days, and he said, my motivation was all wrong. I want to do this training and learning, and I want to do it because I want to be the best version of myself. I want to be an example for my daughter of what leadership is all about. And I want the people around me to be the best they can possibly be. Imagine me at the other end of this line. I mean, this was for real. This guy really wanted to embrace it. And I know he'd had sleepless nights. We met regularly over the course of the next 18 months. And I don't know that I've ever seen someone embrace a journey of self-discovery to the same extent that this fellow did. 18 months later, maybe it was 2 years, he was given the CEO role, and he has transformed that enterprise, which in turn has transformed an industry. I was reading Adam Grant's Think Again just last week, and he talked about how would you compare the version of yourself today to what you were 5 years ago. And in a lot of our cases, there's a tremendous amount of overlap. Maybe we've evolved a little bit. In this gentleman's case, he has become a new version of himself, a far better version of himself, who remains completely true to the values that he always held. The way he applies them is very different. Such an inspiring experience for us.
I've talked to a number of coaches who have worked with executives, and some have told me if the person is not at a place where they're willing and wanting to change, they can't coach them.
That's spot on. We speak about two things. There's the willingness to change, and that's kind of academic. I'm not getting the result I want. I didn't get the job I want. The morale or the engagement score isn't what I want it to be. I'm willing to change. Willingness to change and motivation to change are two quite different things. It's really, really hard work to change the brain patterns, the habits that have formed. In the absence of a really strong motivation, we will default. We will go back to what we were doing before. That's something we really explore with people is what is the higher purpose for doing this? Because in the absence of that higher purpose, when the tough times hit, it's awful easy to go back to where you were.
Moving from the head where you have the idea that I want different results to the heart, I want to change my behaviors because of those different results to forming habits is a long journey. I think it's so true to what you're saying. It's so easy to revert back to older habits that people are comfortable with or familiar with. And having to do things differently can be uncomfortable and rather difficult for some people.
Yeah. We work with a clinical counselor who really helps us on the psychology side of it. And he refers to this habit forming process as a rigorous boot camp exercise.
Ah,
You try it again, you get a little bit better, but then you feel like you're going backwards. But you got to just keep on moving forward with it and be ready for your setbacks. Gary, I'd love to jump on the comment you made about the discomfort. That's a really, really important piece of the journey of leadership and the journey of life. We've done a lot of research on what is true happiness. It certainly isn't sitting on a beach in Maui, although we can enjoy that in the moment. The pursuit of happiness, when people look back on their lives, it will invariably be about times they were working really hard at something they were good at and something that had meaning and purpose. It will be when they worked with people who they trusted, who trusted them in return. The final piece that is really becoming apparent today, it's when they were pulling themselves out of their zone of comfort and stretching themselves to a new place. It reminds me of a fascinating story. I think it was in Flow, the Psychology of Optimal Performance. And it talked about a West Coast First Nations group before colonialization. This was the land of plenty. They had safety, they had food, and they had shelter. Every couple of generations, the leaders of this First Nation would say to their tribespeople, it's time for us to move because we're becoming comfortable here. When we become comfortable, we become complacent. Complacency leads to discontent. Now, I don't think that was the way they spoke about it in the First Nation, but the study since is that's what they talk about. And so they would pack up all of their belongings and they would move and they would start again and embrace that discomfort because ultimately that's what was required for a healthy society.
when we become complacent, that implies you don't develop, you just don't grow.
Yeah, when we stop learning, we stagnate. That can't be healthy. We chatted with a fellow this morning. He's in his early 60s, and most people in their 60s have reached the pinnacle of their career. They speak with wisdom. They feel like they know it, and they've got this. This gentleman inspired the heck out of us because he was talking about his personal coach and how his coach had been advising him to picture himself in the other person's shoes when he was doing labor negotiations and how that might help him in his job. Here he is in his early mid 60s in this journey of continuous improvement, and you could feel the energy emanating from him. Absolutely fascinating. So I see it again and again when people are embracing this journey, they're vibrant, they're growing, and that is really ultimately that where the happiness comes from.
Part 3, help them be at their best. There's a lot that goes into leadership, and Mike knows what it takes to lead effectively. In this part, Mike shares 3 things that we can begin doing immediately to become more effective. Once again, here's Mike.
The biggest thing for any of us as leaders is number one, to embrace what the role really is. We believe at my firm that the role of the leader is to enable people individually and collectively to be the best versions of themselves in pursuit of a noble goal. Encourage leaders to embrace that as job one. That changes your mindset because now my mindset is about what time I will invest in helping my people be the best versions of themselves, be the best they can be. So that would be part one. Part two is to accept with vulnerability that I'm not as good as I can be. I have a lot of learning and growth that's still there, and embrace this opportunity to change for the better. Substitute the word grow for change. Grow for the better of myself and the better of the people around me. Really explore why. Why does this matter to me? Because it's not going to be easy to grow in this way, to form these new habits. So recognize the importance of a motivation that is bigger than self. I moved from that into the construct of Ubuntu, which we haven't talked about, but this is me for we is really the construct, the best me for a better we, and really, really embrace that, and then dig in hard. Lastly, be gentle with yourself, because it isn't going to be easy and you will make mistakes. But if your motivation is strong and you're willing to try new things, you will find the people around you really, really responding to what they see in your growth.
Being gentle with yourself is allowing yourself to have conversations that may be difficult, may be uncomfortable. You may say the wrong things, but that's okay. If you're willing to take that risk and say the other person is offended for whatever reason, then go to that person, apologize, and say, "Hey, look, I'm learning. This is new to me." Being willing to take risks and forgive yourself, and then acknowledge that you make mistakes.
I love that. You may say the wrong thing. One of our adages here is better to say the right thing the wrong way than to say nothing at all.
Oh, wow. I love it.
And I would follow that up with wisdom doesn't grow on our good days.
Yes, very much so. I'm going to go back to your second point. Just want to pull out one thing from that. When we're talking about vulnerability and embracing the opportunity for growth, one of the principles, leadership principles I talk about is very simple. It's encourage growth. Those two words. What I gathered from your advice, you encourage growth with yourself so you could be the best version of yourself, so you can help others be the best version of themselves. It's a two-way direction where you encourage your own growth as well as encourage the growth of others.
Absolutely. Far too often, we'll hear organizational leaders talk about the culture and how they want to see the culture change. And I need them to do this or to do that. They sometimes forget that to a great extent, culture is driven by the behavior of the leader. So hold up the mirror and look into it. Ask yourself, are you really showing up as the best version of yourself? Because if you expect others to change and want them to change, you've got to lead by example.
Yes, you're modeling the behaviors, and people around you will emulate what you're doing, whether you realize it or not.
Absolutely.
My thanks to Mike Watson. If you'd like to learn more about Mike, go to the show notes. And if you have a question or comment, go to unlabelleadership.com, click the message icon, and leave a voicemail for up to 1 minute. I'd like to thank those who donate to the show. Your contributions makes a difference because this is an all-volunteer service. I'd like to thank you for listening. This is Gary DePaul. Until next time, lead on.